Hello, I'm Craig Dumont with PentecostalPastor.com, and with me through our conversation through the Gospel of John is Mark Barber. Mark, where are we at? We're picking up after.
We're going to pick up with chapter 5 of John, and we'll start back at 14.
Chapter 5, 14?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see here. Let me do a quick put on my glasses so I can actually see the.
Sometimes I put just a little bit of connection,
Okay, 5:14.
Afterward, Jesus findeth him in the temple, and said unto him, Behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. The man departed and told the Jews it was Jesus, which had made him whole. And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus, and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. But Jesus answered them, My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because not only had he broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. And we'll stop the reading at that point, because there's going to be a long answer that Jesus is going to give, and I don't know, we'll just have to see how long it takes to get through the first section. Now
just to set this up, when you talk about he was talking to him, and he said, "This man, it's the man who was at the pool,
right,
by Bethesda," and so Jesus asked him if he wanted to be healed. He said, "I don't have anybody put me there." Jesus heals him anyway. So that's the context that
the context that we had talked about. Would have been some of the readers of John, but at least in a place called Pergamum, would understand the idea of what's called Asclepius, and that the pools were in a reflecting pool, and there's some degree of you can find healing. A lot of sickness is caused or aggravated by stress, and by getting into a library, being able to read books, and maybe cool water and some fountains, and you can relieve stress, and I suppose to some degree, healing. There may have been certain herbs and other things that have been mixed in, but the idea, I think, it would have been very good for any psychiatric type of thing. So it's not there were people therapized. The word there is therapy, by the way, and you understand that that's when you were healed. That was therapy. That's therapos in Greek. So and then they put a white stone saying Asclepius healed me of this or that. And you can read in the book of Revelation, I shall give him a white stone. But it ain't, you see, it's not Asclepius that heals, it's Jesus who heals. And this man was kind of in the wrong place, thinking, it's pretty evident since they found the pool that these were the basically reflecting pools and were part of the worship of Asclepius, a snake god, and because we also see with the serpent lifted up in the wilderness, that John is making allusion, but it's not the serpent that was anything, and certainly Satan doesn't heal anybody,
right?
Ultimately, and the healing that he needed was not just in body, because it says, "Go and sin no more, lest a worse thing happen to you."
Yeah, okay. That's kind of a loaded statement. I mean, it would go and sin no more. I mean, that's because which is the opposite of what Jesus said about the blind man. He said, who sinned, he or his parents? And Jesus said, neither, but,
But I have the idea that, first of all, you can't get necessarily a one-size-fits-all. Just because some people, like the blind man, neither this man nor his father sinned, we also realize a lot of people suffer for sins of their own doing.
Oh, yeah.
All right, and so, I think what it would say is...
In fact, there's a spot in the Psalms where David is crying out, said, "My body burns." I forgot the language, but a lot of people many commentators have said that because of his, it was caused from maybe a sexual disease from his extracurricular activity with Bathsheba, some things like that. I don't know if that's true.
I think that the trouble is with the Bible, we try to make, misapply verses and say just because this man was born blind for the glory of God, and of course anybody that is born blind, Yeah, you can't blame the child that did nothing.
Right.
Now, what his parents, if one of his parents had syphilis or something, he could have been born blind. It could have been the sin of the parents. So, but certainly, I think what happens is we try to interpret every event, and we don't possess properly the information. In this case, it's telling us this man's sin had in some way resulted in his condition.
Yep.
And they go your way and sin no more. And that's not the only time to tell somebody not to sin anymore. I think in chapter 8 it talks about the woman that he writes on the ground, and and she's caught in sin, and he has no sin to throw the first stone. And he says, neither do I condemn thee. Go thy way, sin no more. That's like 8.
Well, there's one other, and again I'm going back before the section we read, but. Leading into this, it says, Jesus even asked him, do you want to be well? Do you want to be healed? Which is kind of an interesting question. You'd assume that everybody would automatically say yes, but it is interesting that the guy goes on a long tirade, I shouldn't say a tirade, long spiel, a relatively long spiel about why he can't be. But that's almost kind of like modern people who could get well, but they love being not well.
Well, that's also because it's a security to... this is the only thing I know.
Yeah.
And that's not. I don't think the major point.
No, I don't either.
Of the story being there. I'm not, just because it isn't a major point doesn't mean we ought not to talk about it. But I would say we need to put that in perspective, especially since we don't want to be 17 years going through the Gospel of John and every rabbit hole that one might want to go down. Because this is going to become the occasion of a very long speech by Jesus.
Okay.
And so the result, he goes back and tells the Pharisees. First of all, he shows up in the temple. Jesus never told him to go to the temple. So I got to say something about the man. He wanted to get back into belonging, and he couldn't. Getting back in the temple is kind of the proof of the healing. It's we talked about that last week. A lame man wasn't allowed in, and because a misinterpretation, by the way, of David saying that when they shouted out from the walls of Jerusalem when David was trying to take it, even our blind and lame people, could keep you out of this city. And David pronounces a curse on the lame and the blind. And somehow that becomes a prohibition from these people coming into the temple. There were certain prohibitions in the Old Testament that says that if a man had his stones crushed, that he couldn't act as a priest.
Right.
And so on and so forth. There were exclusions if you were Gentile. And there were certain places you could go or not go. But they made an art form out of it in the time of Jesus. It was like 7 degrees of separation from God, and with the Gentiles being out with the bleeding sheep, the haggling over money changing, and so on and so forth. But it's interesting. He ends up in the temple, so that's he's finally in the right place. Mm-hmm. And then Jesus takes the trouble to find him. Now Jesus, of course, knowing all things, knew the Pharisees wanted an answer to that, and knowing that the man would tell the Pharisees who had done it. He left because there was a big crowd, and Jesus melted into the crowd and disappeared. But later he goes back and finds the man because he's concerned about the man, even though he knows the man's going to tell the Pharisees. And the Pharisees are going to come to him and say, found out it was Jesus who had healed on the Sabbath day. They began to persecute him. Now, or pursue after him with a negative context. In other words, persecute is, it's probably the best word we can use, in English for it, but it's the idea is set themselves to confront and challenge Jesus, okay? A continuous setting of one's face against Jesus and looking for an occasion to maybe trip Jesus up or whatever the case might be. They began to persecute him. And so we'll read just a little bit here, and it says, because he had done, they sought to slay him. So, in other words, this is already, he had reached, he said things about the temple in chapter 2, destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll build it up. And I know there was a controversy whether John places the cleansing of the temple here is the first sign is the healing of Cana of Galilee, the last sign, the cleansing of the temple, and there's a logical, as though that this was a logical rather than temporal progression. And I leave that open to the scholars, but you do see that there is an increasing degree of persecution. It involves and more both Pharisees and Sadducees. And John as a whole, more the Sadducees and the Pharisees, but and in the case of the other Gospels, it was the Pharisees first, then the Sadducees. But Jesus was in trouble with those in Jerusalem from the very beginning, and he calls the opponents the Jews. Now, it might cause some people today and saying, "Oh, well, Jesus is being anti-Semitic." Well, Jesus was a Jew. But yes, according to some people's definition of Semite, then Jesus would have been just about the biggest anti-Semite that ever lived. That's because they have the wrong definition of Semite. But, we have to be honest that the Gospel of John is not overly friendly about the Jewish religious or political establishment of his day. And it's not just in the Gospel of John. You talk about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD was because the Jewish people rejected Christ.
Right.
And, and the early church was desperately persecuted and hunted down by the Jewish people. Now, the fair and balanced thing is that there were a lot of Gentiles that, their Gentiles were involved in the slaying of Jesus too, even though you might say, well, the greater sin relies on the people that knew better and delivered me over. But, we're going to have to deal with this fact, say, if we're going to be, what does Christ say about it? Because sometimes, we just can't take one verse, misquote it, like, I will bless them that bless thee, as though that's saying I will bless Israel. Those that bless Israel and curse those that curse Israel. Israel wasn't even born when Abraham was there. It's thee and not ye. And I think that when you let one verse, just like you try to make a simplified answer about what this man's sin is or didn't sin, sometimes sinned. Sometimes the glory of God, and you ought to be careful not to make an absolute identification. Every time you see something, it's either because they sinned. That was what the Pharisees and all said. Anybody who was born like that or born poor, that was sure they're cursed to God. Anybody who had riches like this rich man Lazarus in the Gospel of Luke, well, he's blessed. But God, Jesus turns the tables. Do you realize that Lazarus, different than the Lazarus in the Gospel of John, by the way, is the only person ever named in a parable. Always a certain man.
Right.
There's a certain rich man. He's the generic rich man. He doesn't have a name. He had fame. He lived luxuriously. He should have been considered amongst the greatly blessed because of all of his riches. He had many brothers. What a blessed family, right? He ate sumptuously. He probably had a wonderful funeral. They probably, had a lot of wailers at his funeral, and the whole community came out. What a good man this was! But he wakes up in Hades.
You're talking about Lazarus, right? Not the
rich man, the certain rich man.
Okay, yeah.
Lazarus has no name. Dies as a pauper, probably might have been body might even been thrown out in Gehenna, out in the garbage heap as as you would treat a dead dog. Remember Jews are not particularly fond of dogs. You didn't have cremation services and pet funerals and all kinds of wild stuff what you have today. And all due respect for people who own dogs, I have a cat, and and I take good care of them. So I mean, I'm not, I'm not putting down pets and
Right.
stuff. I'm just saying that he's treated like a dog, but he's at Abraham's bosom, and he has a name. He had no name on earth, really.
Right.
And he's got a name up there. And the rich man had a name on earth, but he's just a certain rich man. He has no name anymore. He has no place, and he's in hell and torment and looking for a little bit of water to drink. So, we have to look at this, at this whole thing and not try to take one scripture out of context. And I think that we have to see what Jesus says about, the Jewish nation. There's a political entity. So, and, today it's a political entity also, although back then it was under the thumb of the Roman government. But they had some degree, in some places more, in some places less, of autonomy to run their affairs as long as they stayed within the boundaries. So you might want to put it that way.
Yeah.
So, and then they had a religious, and you can't just put all the Jews in one basket. You can't today. You've got certain people who are for the, Zionism, and you've got some of the biggest people like the Jeffrey Sachs, for example, and he's Jewish, and some of the strongest people coming against Zionism in Israel are also Jewish. So I don't, the whole idea is that there's individual Jews,
right,
and there is various factions of the Jews. In those days, you had Essenes. And if Essenes is the same as the Qumran community, may or may not be. But it seems like they're probably pretty close. And you've got Zealots, and you've got Pharisees, you've got Sadducees, you've got Herodians, you've got Hellenistic Jews. And they had certain things in common with each other. And today you've got Reformed Jews, and you've got Hasidic Jews, you've got Orthodox.
But the only two groups that God recognizes is the new humanity, those in Christ, and then those who are not in Christ, the old man. I mean, there's only two divisions.
Oh yeah, well,
today.
we will get into that. Of course, I'm not. As far as salvation is concerned,
man pigeonholes and tries to do this, and God says there's only in humanity. We're going back to the second Adam. That's Jesus Christ. If you're in Him, you are fully human.
Obviously true. That's that. I don't want to get too far ahead of the game. I'm trying to develop things as we go, so that it'll come logically in the argument that John brings out, and of course what Paul brings out, what Matthew brings out, what Luke brings out. Jude, Hebrews. The whole. But the whole argument is no respect of persons with God.
That's right. Yeah.
That's many places in the New Testament. James also. Most Jewish of all the books. James says there's no respect to persons with God. And then neither Jew nor Greek. I don't want, obviously there's a lot that need to be discussed. But here at this point, you've got the antagonists in John's Gospel are called Jews. Now, I'm just simply saying that the only thing that Jews were united in is in crucifying Jesus. Sometimes the Sadducees and Pharisees were at each other's throats. The Essenes were out on the edge of the desert because they figured the priesthood was totally corrupted and was not, it was not a proper high priest because it was the tribe of Judah, and it was sold by the Romans. So I'm saying that anybody comes, and Hellenistic Jews had their particular views, and some of them overlapped here, and two groups might overlap there, but at the same time, they were known more by their division than by their unity, okay? And so when he talks about Jews, who are these Jews? And it says, therefore the Jews came to him, it's not lawful for you to do this on the Sabbath day. And they sought to kill him over that. Now, and then it says, when Jesus responds, my Father worketh until now and hitherto. You have the Greek exercit, but, the very strong but, Allah. In other words, they wanted to kill him for just breaking the Sabbath. But when he claimed that God, the Father, was his personal Father, in other words, idios is in there. In other words, it's stronger than the English says. That God was the Father, it was his own Father. In other words, in a way that he wasn't, if they said, well, God is the father of all mankind, there would have been, there's some people amongst the Jews that, deal with the Abba idea. They, generally, if he's creator, he's also father, although they probably wouldn't use this intimate term Abba, like Jesus used. But the important word is idios, his own father, which means there's something distinct about what Jesus' relationship with the Father, which was distinct from some sort of generalization, because God is the creator of all, is therefore the Father of all. Okay, I just want to, and they, if they wanted to kill him for the less, you can imagine, it sets up how enraged they must have been at what Jesus is going to claim. Now, Jesus answered the Sabbath thing, and we gotta let's take a little time and talk about Sabbath for humanity, and I'm going to say in particular for humanity after the fall. Now, because after that
that's what 99.9% of the Bible is all about. That.
So I'm saying, look, there was a seventh day for Adam and Eve before they sinned, and how they spent it. But after that, the body started to wear down. All of the creation was cursed, and it was put on a clock. How many years, and actually a decreasing clock as time went by. The days got shorter and shorter, and so we have to understand that Jesus being fully man. Had to.
Just one thing though, not everything was. God cursed this. He never cursed Adam and Eve. He cursed the ground, and he cursed the serpent. He didn't.
But he did. Yes, he did. But in the fact that they will certainly die.
Yeah.
That's and
they're under.
Right. Maybe you say they didn't. Even if it's not directly, they were under. The curse. And therefore, their bodies needed rest. Now, I'm not saying their bodies didn't need rest to some degree before. What did God do on the seventh day? It says he rested. And you see, now Jesus is both God and man. There was time there. Jesus' body wore. He got tired. And that Sabbath was made for man.
Right.
And a particular application, not that it's all the Sabbath. It's a part of what has to be understood as the Sabbath.
Right.
And it's a necessary part because we are fallen, we grow tired, we need to refresh ourselves, we need to spiritually renew ourselves, which Jesus did when he could. We need to spend all night in prayer with the Father and so on and so forth. So there is that aspect of the Sabbath, which is, the only Sabbath that a legalist looks at. Now, God contemplated his works on the seventh day, and he rested. And there was arguments, the Jews had arguments that God cannot rest the way man rests, or the whole world will fall apart. If God were not constantly maintaining the universe.
Well, they're right in that. I mean, there's no doubt that they're right. In fact, that's what Jesus affirmed.
But who is the one that maintains all things in Christian theology? Colossians upholds
Christ.
All things by the word of his power.
Right.
Okay, so my Father worketh. That's a present, durative present.
Yeah.
And I work also. We're talking about that Jesus, as God, the Son, is always and necessarily at work in that greater concept, and what rest God has cannot be described. In fact, we really can't. We would really find it hard to find English words to compare it to, because we're so bound by the idea of tired, rest, observance of a day in a particular way, forced rest, like forced labor, forced rest. And sometimes our schedules of life don't work real well with, you got to work when you're dead tired. Yeah. And you can't sleep. Sometimes when you would it'd be the proper time to sleep. You just can't sleep. And so, we realize we live in a fallen and cursed age. But I would say his answer to that question is that my Father worketh, and hitherto I also work, and this is what led to even get more enraged. They were already going to kill him. They wanted to kill him. Then chapter 8, and you also see in Luke chapter 4 and other places where it says, and then they were going to seize him or arrest him, and he just walked out from the midst. So obviously, we can see, but here Jesus is in a crowd, and somehow
You want some more coffee there?
the Pharisees were at the temple of Asclepius, noticing a man carrying his mattress to go back home, breaking the Sabbath. Who broke the Sabbath? Who told you to break the Sabbath? Well, the one who made the Sabbath told you to break the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Not that the man knew that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, and ultimately we'll see there is no breaking of the Sabbath. I mean, actually, we find out Jesus keeps the law perfectly. There's no breaking of the Sabbath.
Yeah, well, we have to understand what we understand the Sabbath. If you make a Sabbath a burden, you cannot get rest.
Right.
You see a woman, for example. I think it's in one of the other Gospels, maybe Matthew, maybe another Gospel. Talk about a woman who had a withered hand for 18 years. 18 years, no rest. Okay? She constantly burdened by the fact she had a hand that was useless. And Jesus on the Sabbath day stretched forth the hand you can't stretch forth. Now, he didn't touch her. He didn't do any of these fancy, things. Didn't spit on her eyes or anything like that. Just gave her a command, and she stretched forth her hand. Now, stretching forth her hand on the Sabbath day, everybody stretches that can will stretch their hand forth sometime during a Sabbath day, unless you're comatose. You're going to, or you got a stroke and you can't stretch forth. Whatever that woman had, she was 18 years bound by infirmity. She had no rest. You can also talk about the woman with the issue of blood, 12 years, no rest, whatever. You had one man that was later on in the book of Acts that was 38 years old, never, whole lifetime. 38 years was close to the average life expectancy. 38 years having to beg, unable to come into the temple, no spiritual rest, a little bit of charity to keep him going. And he had one of the best begging spots, so he did pretty good. His business had a good business going, but he couldn't walk. And he shows that he has the right heart by jumping, leaping, and praising God. Even this man, whatever cost us, if it was sin, still needed to come back to the temple. Yeah. He said there was that, So I'm not saying necessarily how good or bad. I know he gets the rap, stop sinning, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Or a worse thing will come upon you. But he had found, after many years on that mattress, he had found really what rest is. He spent 38 years resting on a mattress. I guess that's a Sabbath, right? If the Jewish idea, he didn't have to carry any burden because he couldn't carry any burden.
Yeah.
Then maybe after 38 years, the fact that he could carry his mattress was actually a proof of Sabbath rather than... So it's the same thing we've been saying all along. As we talked about that, well, is sin because you have an infirmity? Well, it may be. It is, but it is not necessarily so. And God says to judge righteous judgment. Otherwise, don't, pigeonhole. And sometimes we have the idea, we take
Mark, James, I'm sorry to interrupt, but James basically makes that same claim, or he states it the same way.
If he has committed any sin.
That's right. If he has committed any sins, they shall be forgiven him.
Okay.
When he's praying for the sick, right?
But remember, that's if.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean if is not.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying.
If is one of the possibilities or one of the causes of sin, but not the necessarily it was this sickness from a person's sin or even the sins of society for that matter.
Right.
In other words, just you can say, well, this man was born blind because the world is under a curse, and because we're all under the curse, this man was born blind. Not personal sin, but the identification with the sin of Adam. That's true that the sicknesses and stuff we have in this world. In fact, we have shoes that wear off our feet. The fact that we have diseases. Remember, in the Old Testament, it says, if you will, I think it's Book of Deuteronomy, I'm not sure exactly, but it says, if you will, do what's right, the diseases that of the Egyptians won't come upon you, your shoes will not wear out, and so on and so forth. The idea is that, and you've brought this out before, but you get into the first century, the Jews the life expectancy was short, the people were slaves and they were not free, and they were cursed in their own land and not blessed, and and all of a sudden Jesus is healing sick Israelis, and I always use the word Israeli because I think that Jews are not comprehensive enough. That's just a couple tribes. That's just the southern kingdom. Remember, there's Israel. There's 12 tribes. There's something outside, even amongst the descendants of Abraham, or Jacob for that matter, that is bigger than this subset of people, these people that are called Jews. And these Jews that were persecuting Jesus did not represent the entirety of everybody who was a Jew. Now, there were maybe some of the more prominent ones, and you can, and whatever the case might be, but it's not, and the thing that we have to learn from this, as far as judgment is concerned, is we can't just go simply look at the Bible as a book necessarily of do's or don'ts,
Right.
or as a book of advice. Be a David. Well, yeah, be a David when he's slaying Goliath. Don't be a David when he sees Bathsheba from the roof. Okay,
Right.
It's always you got to remember that the story is a very complicated story, and you just can't come up with a single proverb.
Well, the fact is that David's a great warrior king, but I mean, from the biblical examples, he's a horrendous father.
Well, look at even Father Abraham. I was thinking of Father Abraham because that's that was their identification as father. Yeah, it's one verse at the end of the life of Abraham. Right, it says something. It doesn't just say that he gave the 6 sons from Keturah. He says, and he also dismissed and gave gifts to the children of his concubines, plural. Concubines.
I'm trying to place that. Where is
It's
that?
at the time. It's somewhere. It's towards the end of Abraham's life when it says that but Isaac inherited.
Yeah.
But he talks about the 6 sons that he had in Keturah. And then he said he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines.
Okay.
And he had slaves in his household. And he had concubines.
Right.
And he had children by those concubines.
And they were all, and they would have all been circumcised, by the way.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Even the ones that weren't,
Right.
of the race of Shem.
Right.
Well, I'm just saying that we look at Abraham and his amazing acts of faith. Twice he tried to give away his wife.
Well, in fact, you read the place where what's his name? The son of his, my goodness, when Jacob gives, or when Sarah gives her servant.
Yes, Ishmael.
Ishmael. So So I'm drawing a blank here this morning, but Ishmael.
He established his covenant with Isaac.
Yeah.
That's so I'm saying, but understand that Abraham. Now, look at 2 times in his life with Pharaoh. He says his wife is his sister. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Here's what I'd lost my train of thought, but following that up, Ishmael. It's mocking Isaac, but how that may have come about is that Sarah had been taken in for a wife, and he was probably mocking Isaac as illegitimate son, because
We don't know all the back and forth,
right.
and exactly what is meant. And mocking may have been involved some degree of violence as well. I don't know, but it's because there's certainly a jealousy thing. I'm the firstborn.
Yeah.
I'm Abraham's son, and Abraham showed me all this attention for 10 years, and all of a sudden this woman gets pregnant.
Yeah.
And now I've been reduced to being a second-born and a born of a slave woman.
Yep.
And we, but the other time he gives away, God has given that promise. You're going to have a son. Next thing you see is Sarah ends up in Abimelech's harem.
Right.
About the time where things have to happen by natural means for Abraham to get Sarah pregnant.
Right.
Now, he's already must have turned the clock back on Sarah and made her a beautiful woman. I mean, she's, 89 years old?
Well, she's gorgeous. I mean,
and all of a sudden, and he had a fear, and God had to act quickly to get her back home so that,
I guess you could
Isaac
say that.
could be
I guess
conceived.
you could say the '90s for her was the new 30.
I don't know, but I'm saying that he set back the clock, set back Abraham's clock too. By the way, I might add, but best reset the clock, because the whole idea of Isaac being born as 100 when his father's 100 is that by that time I always say by natural means there would be very few men that would be able to father a child. In fact, it would.
Cary Grant did a pretty good job.
Huh?
I said Cary Grant did a pretty good job.
I was thinking more Strom Thurmond. But.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. But yeah, you're right. It's and of course you see the demonic attempt to subvert that, because instead of coming through Abraham, it would have been through Pharaoh. God has to protect.
And both times he protects. And we have a real good study on Abraham.
Yeah.
Here at Pentecostal Pastor,
with a study guide even.
With a study guide, so
Videos
you might want to look into it. So, getting back to the idea of the Sabbath. Now, the word's important. This is what a revelation of Jesus. It's not that John has already told us from the very beginning, from the prologue, who Jesus is. Mm-hmm. So it's not a matter that we're clued in from the John. At least by John 1:3, we're already clued in. The first 3 verses, and the Word was God, and in fact, He's the Creator of all things. Mm-hmm. And so so we already know, and also we see a hint when He says that He knew everybody's heart, didn't need anybody to ask what was somebody's heart. So and the fact He turned water into wine, the first sign, and then He speaks the word. You remember the God who creates by speaking. You go to your way, your son liveth, and we just had that in the previous passage. So, and so we see hints, and as a matter of fact, we see a hint even by the Samaritan woman that she understands the divinity of Jesus. But, so a lot of people are saying, does John teach the full divinity of Christ? And and people are always trying to find workarounds, for them, making just a little bit less. But here it says, because that you make yourself, thus making Himself equal with God. This won't be the first time that Jesus is charged with that. And this is not just in the Gospel of John. It says, thought it not robbery to equal with God in Philippians, the 2nd chapter. That, and the whole idea, who is this Jesus, who says, my Father worketh, and hitherto I work. We also read that I am the Lord of the Sabbath. Well, when in one of the other Gospels says, the Lord of the Sabbath. Well, if He's Lord of the Sabbath, He must be God, because everything, all creation, is subject to the Sabbath.
Right.
So for God's purpose of Sabbath, even the animals had a chance for their rest, and and
isn't it interesting how that's a cycle? There's cycles that are almost impossible that are impossible. Like for instance, the first thing that in the French Revolution, they tried to do. That's where actually the metric system came from. They tried to do away with the 7-day week. They tried to go to a 10-day week. I mean, there's always this people. I mean, the ungodly are always trying to destroy that Sabbath, in whatever form it takes place, and whether it's 7 days or the 7 years or the 49 year, whatever. All those
the 7 spirits of
God.
God.
That's exactly right.
And
they're always trying to destroy that. So it's I guess 7 is what the God's number of completion. I mean, is that
7th is no 7th? Well,
or would it be
no,
8?
you have to understand. You get a lot into Kabbalah.
Yeah.
And you get a lot into Jewish mysticism and Christian mysticism about the number 7. But 7 is the number.
I always grabbed 7 when I played baseball. 7 was my number.
7. Well, 7. Yes. In other words, 7 is the number. Mickey Mantle's number was 7.
Yeah.
I was a Mickey Mantle fan when I was a whole lot younger. But 7. First of all, you have like Beersheba. That's the well of the 7. Mm-hmm. The well of the oath, and Sabbath and the idea of 7 is thought of, and I think with some good biblical support. Although you got to be careful not to go overboard.
Right.
But it is the number of God.
Yeah.
Because man was created on the 6th day.
Right.
Which is not 7.
Right.
Less than 7.
Yeah.
But next to 7.
Yeah.
Now that would be, that would be kind of the way the thinking is done. I'm a little careful. I don't want to get.
So, Mark, what does it when the you mentioned that there's a whole lot of extra things that are thrown in on the Sabbath. There is some truth to the fact that you weren't, like for instance, you weren't allowed to chop wood, for instance, on the Sabbath. You weren't allowed to. There was some things that you could not do on the Sabbath. But how did they come up with so many fantastical things that you can't do? Or for instance, you remember when Lieberman was running for president? Mm-hmm. He couldn't drive. He couldn't. What was it? He couldn't drive to the airport because I forgot what it was. They got around that by all these weird things.
Let's just talk a little bit about what happens with Sabbath.
Yeah.
Now, there is a tractate, I think it's the Mishnah, I don't know, maybe the Talmud. It's called Barakot. Barakot is the first words of the Bible in the beginning. And they have a first tractate in there talks about the Sabbath. It goes, I read it was 18 pages of tiny print about a man and a beggar and the Sabbath day.
Wow.
And how a man inside his house could give bread to a beggar outside of his house without either the man nor the beggar breaking the Sabbath. And they go into tiny detail. Well, let's try this one. No, the man breaks the Sabbath. No, the beggar breaks the Sabbath. No, they both break the Sabbath. And they're trying to find some way that you could actually do it without breaking their interpretation of the Sabbath laws. And the whole thing, if you read that 18 pages, you'll realize exactly how they've made the Sabbath a burden and not a rest.
Just as an aside here, let's just, in the Old Testament, what is there, 617 laws?
Well, they say there's 6, depending how you interpret. But you have to understand even the 10 Commandments.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is
there's actually 13 commandments in the 10.
But what I'm saying is that they take those commandments, and they complicate it. So, because ultimately the law was beautiful. I mean, as God gave it, the law was beautiful. It was to attract people. Of course, I'm not saying that they could keep every aspect. Obviously not. The law killeth. But in terms of God's law being holy and beautiful and true, it was a light. It was supposed to be something that was so attractive that people would say, "You see this people that keeps God's law. That their God is a wonderful God." It was supposed to be evangel, but they take it and they warp that to such an extent that not only does it become unattractive to the nations, but it becomes they're bogged down in.
I think
it's just
part of the law, remember there's two aspects of the law. There is what's called case law, and then
Right.
case law says it says in this is trying to apply
Yes.
the spirit
Right.
of the greater law.
Yeah.
And how do we apply the Sabbath law to without breaking the Sabbath? And we can see in the Bible one man was gathering sticks
Yeah.
on the Sabbath day. Well, that must not be good because he got stoned for it.
Right.
And you see that people went out on the Sabbath day to try to get the manna, or try to and whatever it is, and they were there was no manna to be gathered on the seventh day, and the manna of the sixth day only on the sixth day carried them through the seventh day, so they wouldn't have to work. So you have these are cases,
Right, and then you have the beast of burden who falls into who Jesus actually says that who of you that wouldn't have, like, for instance, one of your work animals that falls into a ditch. You go get that. You go get him out.
Because there's the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
And the letter of the law.
Right.
I mean, Montesquieu and a whole bunch of other people throughout history are trying to, talk about that you can break the spirit of the law by keeping the letter of the law.
Yeah.
And which is exactly what they were trying to do in this case. This man, 38 years, I think, whatever it was, he was, he was waiting for at rest. He was keeping a 38-year Sabbath, as we mentioned before, and the first time he doesn't, keep it happens to be that seventh day, right?
Yep.
And they go and they want to kill Jesus, a man who did a good deed for them. Oh, there's 6 days you should work, because that's man.
Yeah.
God works 7 days a week.
Yeah.
365 days a year from the beginning of time and of creation, even to now, maintaining his creation.
Yes.
And God said, even the Jews admitted that he couldn't spare 1 minute. So the fact that Jesus saying, I have the right to work on the Sabbath, that's why they said that he was making himself equal to God and calling God his personal Father in a way, as we said before, that it wasn't for everybody else. It wasn't a generic application.
Yeah.
Now, in today's world, they say, well, Jesus, he's the Son of God, but you're the Son of God, I'm the Son of God. And we've gotten correct with our terminology. Daughter of God, sibling, otherwise, I don't know, with all the different genders we got running around, once you get past 2, you get confusion, because God is, set up a division, male and female. He hasn't put any other stuff together. But so you have the idea of what's called the intent of the law. And the intent of the law, the Sabbath, given to man. Understand, God rested the seventh day, and there's and we only can get a glimpse of what, but it has the idea of contemplation, looking over what he had created, and after he blessed it and called it very good at the end of the 6th day, so forth, and so he didn't create any new things, but he still maintained the things that are.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the important thing. So Jesus says, my Father worketh. That's a present tense. And I also work. It's a statement of divinity. And it says they wanted to kill him for breaking the Sabbath. That but says they really wanted to do him after he called. Because what? If Jesus is not who he says he is, well, then who would Jesus be? But the worst of blasphemers. But Jesus says, I can't bear false testimony about myself. I am. I can't deny myself. It says, we might deny him, but he himself cannot deny. He cannot deny himself. This is, I think, in Timothy somewhere, we're talking about one of the statements about God. That, he can't. In other words, and Jesus says someplace in John that if I were to say otherwise, I would be a liar just like you. I have to bear true witness about myself. This is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
We've had the first I am statement that, when if the woman at the well, a blank I am statement. Next chapter, I am the bread of life. But there's the idea of this I am. And he can't deny himself. I am the Son of the Father. What do you want him to say? That I'm just a prophet?
Yeah.
That I'm just a good man? I'm right along with Buddha and Muhammad, Confucius and other great men, other prophets. Not that the Bible would call a prophet anybody other than a child of Yahweh.
Yeah.
But no, not Buddha,
Right.
but the world would consider it. So, what do you make of Jesus? Who do you people say that I am? You ask that question in the church today.
Yeah.
Think of how many answers you might get.
Yeah. Well, everyone makes up their own Jesus, their own God.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just saying that. Look, we can talk to the whole world. I don't want to get involved in all the misconceptions of Jesus out there, whether he's a good teacher or apocalyptic madman, or I got our Lord of the Ferrari, and we got the liberating Jesus, we got the rich man Jesus, got the people keep trying to make Jesus in their image.
Yeah.
And the liberations, the communist Jesus. Well, that's really kind of interesting, because if you're a communist, you're an atheist also, and how could Jesus be?
It's interesting. You just said they try to make Jesus in their image, when actually it's the other way around. Man was made in the image of God, and then that image has been blurred. Of course, it's not out, but it's been the sin distorts.
But it's rendered effectively useless. Now, that doesn't mean it is not true. It just means that you can't save yourself.
Right. Yeah.
It means that you are depraved.
Yeah.
And not just a little bit defined depraved. In other words, because some people are more, by our definition, more depraved than other people.
Yeah,
But it's ultimately unable to save ourselves.
That's what total depravity means. When you talk from I should say from a realistic a lot of what passes for Calvinism today, and Calvin would hate that term Calvinism, but a lot what passes for that today isn't even close to what Calvin said or taught. But total depravity, that whole idea of total depravity, simply is exactly what you mean. It means that we are totally unable to save ourselves. That we are caught in sin. We're dead in sin, and we're captive by the...
and even we are worse than our own assessment of ourselves.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
At least, and so
That's right.
That's what we have to understand. And the other thing, this is deal with the monotheism idea. Now, the Word became flesh. The Word takes on our image while retaining the perfect image of God. At least in a special way, both images.
Yeah, I'd like to do a little fine tuning there. I know what you're saying. I agree. The Word takes on. Basically, I mean, he takes on because man is made in his image. Jesus becomes flesh, but there's some aspect of that, because Christ was the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, and God says, "Let us make man in our image." He comes in the same way. He has no sin, but there's a I don't know how to put this, because I know what you're saying, but there is a real sense that Jesus comes as the true image of God, which was what man was supposed to be.
Yes, well, let's just define. that the Creed of Chalcedon, one of the most, is very rich, very dense.
What's that?
Creed of Chalcedon.
Oh, yeah.
And that there's no mixture of the natures. Just two
huge,
distinct,
huge philosophical stuff.
yeah, two distinct natures, human and divine.
Right.
Only one Christ.
Right.
Two nations, not mixed.
Right.
Otherwise, he's not a tertium quid or a third kind, a
Right.
mixture of the human and the divine.
Yeah.
And they're just doing that because that's the best we can do with our language. Okay, there's a limitation of the
Yeah.
language of the two natures of Christ. We
Right.
have to say fully God, fully human, and one Christ, not
Right.
not a mixture of human and divine, because and that's the best we can do. That's what If you
But it's interesting on that, Mark. If I'm not mistaken, they don't really talk about image. They do talk about nature a lot, the natures. But in terms of image, that's always been just touched on, but pulled back for a lot. And a lot of that image, a lot of the image of God stuff. I don't mean that in a
but Jesus
light way,
understands the image of himself, because if he's God, and he's also, and we talk about the image of Christ. He's called icon, by the way, in the book of Hebrews. So, there is the word image as well as character, which is another, another related word to it in the book of Hebrews. So, this whole idea of image. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down in that. I'll just say that this is that it's ultimately we have to accept the definition and say that's better minds than mine and yours have struggled for centuries, and
better than mine,
better than yours, better than President Trump's too. That's so we have to understand that's the two things that are the most difficult Christian doctrines are the two natures of Christ, and the other is the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And we run into the same, and here we're
well, you're
dealing.
touching on it right here.
We're dealing with Father and Son. The Son is equal to the Father.
Yeah.
Now it clearly says that, but the Son also is going to say later on that I just do what the Father tells me to do. I'm obedient to the will of the Father, and I don't say my own words. I say His words. Not robbery to be equal with God, and yet he became obedient to death, even the death of the cross, as we see.
It's a mystery. Well, when it comes down to it, Mark, you and I both, Paul says it, but it's the mystery. It's the triune God. There's a lot of what we talk about. We try to scientifically divide everything these days.
Yeah,
we got this even within theology, we become scientific.
Although that goes back to Aristotle. There's nothing new under that. Maybe before Aristotle.
Yeah, but ultimately, it comes down to this. There are parts that, as you just said, you and I, we can't explain. Yeah. And even if you read through the Creed of Chalcedon, if you read all the debate that went on, and I'm not a super high Q guy or necessarily but if you read that, you go through a lot of that stuff, a lot of what, not only that, but some of these great teachers that came along, they get so philosophical, and I'm thinking, you really don't have to. It gets beyond what anybody can really.
You get to the point where you dig yourself deeper and deeper into a pit. Then you have to explain your explanations.
Yeah.
And explain the explanations of your explanations, and pretty soon you are so deep in the pit.
It's all metaphysical. They move into a metaphysical thing, and I don't mind some of that. I don't mind because we have the ability. I will say this. We have the ability. God gave us the ability to conceptualize. I mean, we can see things. We can understand things. We can pull out things just like we came up with cell phones where you can the ability to figure out that you can send the sound of my voice across the world by speaking into one and getting it somewhere else. I mean, that's that takes, that alone, people don't even think about this, but that puts man so far above any other creature, the ability to conceptualize. So I'm not criticizing the idea to think in philosophical terms to some extent, but when that philosophy moves away from Christ and where we move it away from everything exists in Christ, that's where it becomes kind of shady.
But here's the problem is. God looked down upon his creatures and saw that minds were bent towards evil continually. Violence was everywhere.
You're talking about pre-flood.
Yeah, and so they were working already with bronze and iron, and they may even if let's just say the pyramids actually precede the flood.
Yeah.
And you have the idea that all of a sudden you got all these paintings in these tombs underground, intricate, beautiful paintings in a place where the sun only shone in that place for 2 hours a year if it was based on the solstice, the equinox, or once a year depending on the first day of summer.
What were you talking about now?
The paintings in all these tombs.
Oh yeah, right.
And they're carved out of the rocks, so it's not like they painted and then reassembled them down there. And you realize, they took torches. Oh, did they? Now, what happens if you go into an enclosed space with a burning torch? First of all, you have soot over everything. Second of all, the people would die.
Yeah.
Unless they could find some way of bringing air breathers, rebreathers in, or they had some sort of electric light, or some sort of bioluminescence, or whatever.
Yeah.
In other words, there's indications that technology, even in these underground tombs and the intricate paintings going back to maybe 2500 BC and that there was actually the technology advanced quite a bit, and they had to be cut back. There's others who would hold, I don't particularly, about that there was a creation before creation.
You know what, but you made a good point there. See, a lot of people, when we're looking back, we forget something. When Adam and Eve, when God created them, and then all the way up through the flood, the Bible says that the whole earth, so the population was immense. By the time the flood hit, it says that the world was filled. I mean, there was a filling, and so you're right. We forget about that. We also forget that man immediately he creates tools. He creates musical instruments.
Yeah.
He's got the ability there's all of these things, and we think that we're like so sophisticated, but
as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be in the times of the end. I'm just saying that the idea is the first caveman in the Bible is Lot and his two daughters.
Yeah.
Mine.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Now, it may be they got reduced back. In other words, the technology, because they were going to destroy themselves, the technology, that God had to put an end to it because it wasn't his time to bring everything together. And he just said,
it was all being evil. They were all evil.
Evil continually. So there's an idea that there's an act of grace that he saved 8 people but the whole world was very similar to the way it is today. And, is this. Now, remember, we talk about a day for the Lord, 1,000 years is a day to the Lord. And so we got to be careful, we mark our time. Is this the end time? Certainly. Are we very close to the end of time? Yes, but that's in God's calendar. How that works out in human lifetimes, or whether, and we think in terms of, 100 years is an eternity. So I don't know, but I just want to, it's an interesting thing. We'll have to maybe make another discussion about. I have a whole study that I brought forth at North Carolina at the Billy Graham Center when I gave the speech on, as it was in the days of Noah, talking about the pre-flood, the world and how that reflects upon how technology and the soul of man. I have that one in Logos if you want to look into technology and the soul of man. Sermons.logos.com/MARKABARBER, and just look under technology and the soul of man, and we can find that. So we're running kind of short on our time this morning. Next time we'll bring over the idea of what monotheism is. I don't want to, it would take too long at this point to go into, dealing what it means to be equal with God and what that might mean. So we already did a little bit of the two natures of Christ. Now, next time we'll deal on the and because this is going to go into a deep discussion about Jesus, the person of Jesus, the divine person of Jesus, and his.
And by the way, I want to be real clear. I'm not denigrating the work that they did at Chalcedon or Chalcedon, however you want to pronounce it. But there's no doubt that was a very, very, very important council, because that whole council, I mean, basically took up. I mean, the person and work of Christ, and how he related to the Father was very, very important. He wasn't just like the Father. He was. He wasn't just like God. He was God. So I don't want to diminish that. I'm just saying that sometimes, sometimes they got so trapped in that way of thinking that they forgot that that the gospel does. Although we're always learning more, God likes that. The angels look down and they see us learning some things, and they're like, wow, it's marvelous. And we're made in the image of God, so there's always this attempt to know and understand more. I think this race into space, I think it's marvelous.
I think it's awful.
I think it's, God, I'm not, anything can be perverted, but it's amazing what God has
does it show
us.
that what man's imagination is capable of doing? Yes, but let me just close up. The whole idea of Chalcedon is that modern people like Berkouwer and more Bart have said that the trouble with the Dort and Chalcedon is that they only can see God in static categories, and we have to see relationships as being dynamic, and they did the best we can. Now we got a new, better way of understanding. We've gone beyond Chalcedon and Dort, and all of a sudden, sooner or later, you see they've gone deep off the deep end. They've left the plantation with some of their thinking. They've thought themselves into a worse.
Well, I'm not defending any of those guys. I think, but I think that there's a little bit of truth in some of that stuff.
There's always. But I think the idea is that the model of a Christian is obedience.
That's true.
And
to what though?
Yes, but
to Scripture.
But at the same time, we get to the point we saw in 15 centuries, all kinds of additions, perversions, many good things, many bad things. I'm not going to say, but you ended up with something where you needed a reformation.
Right.
And then even in Luther's day, when he was about to die, he left 43 volumes of stuff, and he says, throw away it all, especially the old stuff, which means I've learned a few things over the years. And the trouble is we build this huge superstructure, almost to the point where we lose the foundation. We're so far removed from the foundation, we start commenting on commentaries of commentaries of commentaries of commentaries, and we end up...
Someone once said that the Bible sheds a lot of light on those commentaries.
Well, anyway, we have gone to our limit today, and so anyway, we'll pick up with that next week.
Great. Thanks, Mark.